I tried to hide my affair by blaming him, but he turned the whole room against me. I don't even know where to start because I feel like I've been holding this in for so long, and now it's all just bubbling out of me. I'm not even sure if I'm ready to tell this, but I guess it doesn't matter because what's done is done. And I know people will probably hate me for what I'm about to say, but maybe I deserve that. Maybe I need to hear how awful I've been because honestly, I don't think I fully grasped it myself until now. So my husband and I have been married for 10 years, 10 long years. And when I say long, I don't mean it in a bad way, but also maybe I do. I mean, we've been through a lot together, and in the beginning everything was good. No, it was more than good. It was perfect. I felt like I had found my other half, my soulmate, or whatever you want to call it. He was sweet and funny and caring, and he made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered to him. And I loved that feeling. I loved him. For the first few years, we were like one of those couples you see in movies where everything is rainbows and butterflies. We couldn't keep our hands off each other, and we would talk about everything and nothing all at once. We dreamed big together and we laughed a lot. And honestly, I thought that's how it would always be. I thought we were one of the lucky ones who found the kind of love that lasts forever. But then, somewhere along the way, things started to change. I don't even know when it happened, but it did. Maybe it was around the 5-year mark because I remember that being the first time I felt it. It was like this little whisper in the back of my mind that I couldn't ignore, even though I wanted to. It told me something wasn't right, and I wasn't happy, and I didn't love him the way I used to. And the worst part is that I didn't even know why. He didn't do anything wrong. He was still the same sweet, funny, caring guy I married, but I didn't feel the same. At first I thought it was just a phase. Like maybe I was stressed out or tired or something and it would pass. So I tried to ignore it, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. And then I started noticing other men, noticing them in a way I shouldn't have. Like I would catch myself staring at a guy at the gym or wondering what it would be like to kiss the guy who worked at the coffee shop. And I hated myself for it. I really did. But no matter how hard I tried to stop, I couldn't. It was like this itch I couldn't scratch, and it was driving me crazy. And then one day, I met him, my yoga instructor. God, I feel so stupid saying that out loud, but it's the truth. I started taking yoga classes because I thought it would help me relax and clear my head. And it did at first. But then I noticed him, and he noticed me, and suddenly yoga wasn't about relaxing anymore. It was about him. The way he smiled at me when I walked in, or the way he would adjust my poses just a little longer than necessary. I knew it was wrong, but I liked the attention. I liked the way he made me feel, like I was alive again. I tried to fight it. I really did. I told myself it was just a harmless crush and that it didn't mean anything. But the more I saw him, the harder it was to resist. And then one day, after class, he asked me if I wanted to grab a coffee, and I said yes. And that's where it started. Just a simple coffee date that turned into something so much more. At first, it was just coffee and talking. But then it was lunch and flirting, and then it was drinks and touching, and before I knew it, we were having an affair. And it wasn't a one-time thing. It was constant. Whenever I could find an excuse to see him, I did. And every time I was with him, I felt like I was on top of the world, like I was finally living the life I was meant to live. And I didn't think about my husband or how much I was hurting him because in those moments, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was how I felt. I know how selfish that sounds. I know how awful it is, but at the time I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. I told myself my husband would never find out, so no one was getting hurt. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew I was betraying the one person who had always been there for me, the one person who loved me unconditionally, and yet I kept doing it anyway. The guilt would hit me in waves. Some days it was so strong that I couldn't even look at my husband without wanting to cry. But other days I would push it aside and tell myself it didn't matter. I would tell myself I deserved to be happy, even if it meant hurting him. And that's the part that makes me sick to my stomach now. The fact that I could be so cold and heartless to someone who gave me nothing but love. And the worst part is that I don't even know why I did it. I mean, I know I was unhappy, but I could have talked to him about it. I could have told him how I was feeling instead of going behind his back, but I didn't. And now, I have to live with that. I have to live with the fact that I destroyed the trust and the love we built together. I wish I could say, I've learned my lesson or that I'm a better person now, but I don't think that's true. I think I'm still the same selfish person I was back then, and that scares me because I don't want to be this person anymore. I don't want to hurt the people I love, but I don't know how to change. I don't even know if I can. Maybe that's why I'm writing this. Maybe I'm hoping that by putting it all out there, I can finally start to let go of the guilt and the shame that's been eating away at me. Or maybe I'm just looking for someone to tell me I'm not as horrible as I think I am, but the truth is I probably am. I can't even say how it all got so messy, but it did. After the affair with my yoga instructor started, it was like something inside me had woken up, and I couldn't put it back to sleep. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. It was exciting and wild, and I didn't want it to stop. At first, it was just him, and I told myself that was all it would ever be. I said it was a small thing, one little secret that no one needed to know. But then, over time, it turned into something much bigger than I could control. I started craving that feeling all the time, the rush of sneaking around and the thrill of being desired by someone else. It was like a drug. I couldn't get enough. And the yoga instructor wasn't enough anymore. I started flirting with other men, just to see if I could get their attention. It was harmless, I thought, because it wasn't like I was doing anything. But deep down, I knew it wasn't harmless. I knew it was wrong, and I knew I was pushing things too far. Before long, I found myself doing things I never thought I'd do. I would go out late at night and tell my husband I was meeting friends, but I wasn't. Sometimes, I would sneak out early in the morning and make up some excuse about errands or work. And every time, I would promise myself it was the last time, but it never was. It was like I couldn't stop myself. I would meet men, sometimes from the gym, sometimes online, and I would do things I can't even say out loud. Things that make me feel sick when I think about them now. I don't even know why I was doing it. It wasn't like I didn't love my husband in some way. He was still kind and thoughtful, and he tried so hard to make me happy. He would ask me if I was okay and if there was anything I needed, and I would lie to his face and tell him everything was fine. I would look him in the eye and say I loved him, and then a few hours later, I would be with someone else. And the worst part is, I didn't even feel bad about it at the time. I think I started getting careless because by the time we had been married for 7 years, my husband started to notice something was off. He didn't say anything directly, but I could see it in the way he looked at me. There was this doubt in his eyes, like he was trying to figure out if I was hiding something. And I knew he was starting to piece things together, even though he didn't have any proof. There were nights when he would stay up late waiting for me to come home, and I would walk through the door with some silly excuse about losing track of time or running into an old friend, and he would just nod and say okay, but I could tell he didn't believe me. And that scared me because I knew if he ever found out the truth, it would destroy him. But instead of stopping, I just got better at lying. I started being more careful about deleting messages and hiding receipts. I would make sure to leave the house when he wasn't paying attention, and I would come up with detailed stories to explain where I had been. And every time I got away with it, I felt a little rush of relief. But that relief never lasted long because I knew I was playing a dangerous game. I started noticing little changes in him. He seemed quieter than usual, like he was lost in his own thoughts. He stopped joking around as much, and he didn't smile as often. And I knew it was because of me. I knew he was starting to doubt everything, and it broke my heart to see him like that. But instead of doing the right thing and coming clean, I just kept lying. There was this one time when he asked me if I was happy, and I could tell he was trying to figure out if there was something wrong. And I just smiled and told him I was. I told him I loved him and that everything was perfect, and he smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. And at that moment, I felt like the worst person in the world. But even that wasn't enough to make me stop. I told myself I would be more careful and that he would never find out, and I kept doing what I was doing. I kept sneaking out and meeting other men and pretending like everything was fine at home, and the truth is, I think I was addicted to the thrill of it all. I started feeling like I was living 2 separate lives. In one life, I was a loving wife who went to work and cooked dinner and cuddled on the couch with her husband. And in the other life, I was this wild, reckless person who did whatever she wanted and didn't care about the consequences. And the lines between those two lives started to blur, and it became harder and harder to keep everything straight. I would catch myself lying about things that didn't even matter, just because I was so used to lying all the time. And every time I lied, I felt like I was digging myself into a deeper hole. But instead of climbing out, I just kept digging. My husband started asking more questions, and I could tell he was getting suspicious. He would ask me why I was spending so much time out of the house, or why I seemed so distracted, and I would make up some excuse and hope he would drop it. And for the most part, he did. But I could see the doubt growing in his eyes, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he figured it out. There were nights when I couldn't sleep because I was so scared of what would happen if he found out. I would lie in bed next to him and listen to him breathe, and I would wonder if he would ever forgive me for what I had done. And then I would remind myself that he didn't know anything yet, and I would convince myself that I still had time to fix things. But I didn't fix things. I just kept making them worse. I thought I had everything under control, even though deep down I knew I didn't. I was living a double life, and my lies were starting to pile up so high that I couldn't keep track of them all. But I told myself it was fine because my husband still didn't know. He suspected something, sure, but he didn't have any proof. I just had to be careful, and everything would stay the same. Or at least, that's what I thought. Then something happened that I never saw coming. My husband's secretary retired. She an elderly woman who had been working for him for years, so when she left, it was a big deal. And it wasn't long before he hired someone new. Her name was Beatrice. She was young, beautiful, and everything I wasn't. She had this kind of fresh, sweet energy about her that made everyone like her right away. She was polite and hardworking, and from what I could see, she was really good at her job. Everyone in his office seemed to adore her, but I hated her the second I saw her. Not because she did anything wrong, but because I could feel the jealousy bubbling up inside me. She was everything I wasn't anymore, young, vibrant, confident, and I hated the thought of her being around my husband every day. I hated that she would be laughing at his jokes and spending hours alone with him in his office. And most of all, I hated how insecure it made me feel. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was being ridiculous. My husband wasn't the type of guy to cheat. I mean, if anyone in our marriage was a cheater, it was me. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to convince myself that maybe he would. After all, he was probably starting to notice how distant I had been lately, and Beatrice was so pretty and sweet. It wouldn't take much for him to fall for her, or at least that's what I told myself. So I started bringing her up all the time. I would casually mention her name in conversations, acting like I was just curious about how things were going at work. But I wasn't just curious. I was testing him, trying to see if there was anything in the way he talked about her that might give him away. And every time he said she was doing a good job or mentioned something nice about her, it would eat away at me a little more. It wasn't long before I started planting little seeds of doubt. I would make comments about how pretty she was or how young she was, and I would say that he must really enjoy having her around. At first, he didn't seem to notice what I was doing, but eventually he started to get annoyed. He would tell me I didn't have anything to worry about, and that she was just his secretary. But that wasn't good enough for me. I needed him to feel as uncomfortable as I did, so I pushed harder. I started accusing him of things, even though I knew he wasn't doing anything wrong. I would state that he had been spending a lot of time at work, or asking if it was just work keeping him so busy. And the more I said these things, the more it started to create tension between us. We began fighting about it constantly. Every time he came home late or mentioned her name, I would blow up. I would tell him he wasn't being honest with me and that I didn't trust him around her. And the thing is, I didn't even believe my own accusations. I knew he wasn't cheating on me, but I needed to make him feel like the bad guy. I needed to shift the focus away from me and my own guilt. And it worked. The more I accused him, the guiltier he seemed to feel. He would go out of his way to reassure me, telling me over and over again that he loved me and that nothing was going on with Beatrice. And I would pretend to believe him, even though I kept bringing it up. I could see how frustrated he was getting, and I could tell it was starting to wear him down. And in a twisted way, I liked that. I liked that he was the one on edge for a change. I liked that I wasn't the only one feeling guilty all the time. Meanwhile, I was still sneaking around and doing things I shouldn't have been doing. But now, it was easier to justify it to myself. I told myself that if he could spend all day with Beatrice, then I had every right to do what I was doing. I convinced myself that I was just evening the score, even though there was nothing for me to even the score for. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just going to work and trying to provide for our family, while I was out there lying and cheating and making a mess of everything. But I didn't care. I was too caught up in my own games to think about the damage I was causing. I started going out even more, telling him I needed space, or that I was too stressed to stay at home. And every time I left, I would come up with some new excuse about where I was going. And because he was so focused on trying to prove to me that he wasn't doing anything wrong, he didn't question me as much as he probably should have. Looking back now, I can see how manipulative I was being. I was using his kindness and his love for me against him, and I was making him feel like he was the one who had to prove himself, even though I was the one who was breaking all the rules. And the worst part is, I didn't even feel bad about it at the time. I was so caught up in my own lies and my own selfishness that I didn't stop to think about how much I was hurting him. I kept telling myself that as long as he didn't find out about what I was doing, it didn't matter. I told myself that all couples have their ups and downs, and this was just a rough patch that we would get through. But deep down, I think I knew that wasn't true. I think I knew that I was destroying our marriage piece by piece, and I was doing it on purpose. And that's the part that keeps me up at night now. The fact that I could be so cruel too. My lies, my accusations, my deceit, they had all become second nature to me. I didn't even stop to think about the consequences or the damage I was causing. All I cared about was keeping the spotlight off me and finding ways to make him feel as uneasy as I felt. So when he told me he had a business trip coming up and Beatrice was going with him, I saw it as the perfect opportunity to make things worse. It wasn't unusual for him to take his secretary on trips. He had done it plenty of times before with his old secretary, and I never gave it a second thought back then. But this time was different because it was Beatrice. She wasn't some older, harmless woman who had been with him for years. She was young and beautiful, and in my twisted mind, that made everything feel suspicious. The second he told me about the trip, I felt this knot of jealousy tighten in my chest. I could picture the two of them traveling together, eating meals together, and spending hours alone in hotel conference rooms. It didn't matter that it was all work-related or that he had never given me a reason to doubt him. In my head, I decided it was suspicious, and that was enough for me. While he was away, I did exactly what I always did when I was left alone. I met up with one of my lovers. I didn't feel guilty about it because, in my mind, I had already convinced myself that my husband was probably doing the same thing with Beatrice. I told myself it was only fair, even though I knew deep down that wasn't true. I spent those days doing whatever I wanted, enjoying my little escape from reality while my husband was working hard miles away. I didn't think about him much, and when I did, it was only to fuel my anger. I told myself he was probably laughing and flirting with Beatrice while I was at home feeling neglected, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. When he finally came back, I was ready for a fight. I didn't even give him a chance to settle in before I started accusing him of things. I told him it wasn't normal for a married man to travel with a beautiful young secretary, and that he was being disrespectful to me by even allowing it to happen. I said he was hiding something and that there was no way he could spend that much time with her without something inappropriate happening. No! He tried to defend himself, but I didn't want to hear it. I was too busy tearing him apart, listing all the reasons why I thought he was being unfaithful. I told him that if he cared about our marriage, he would fire Beatrice and hire someone else. I said it was the only way I could trust him again, even though I knew that wasn't true. Trust had nothing to do with it. I just wanted to punish him, but he refused. He said Beatrice hadn't done anything wrong and that she was good at her job, and he wasn't going to let her go just because I was insecure. He said I had no reason to doubt him and that my accusations were unfair. But that only made me angrier. I told him he didn't want to let her go because he liked her too much. I said he was defending her because there was something going on between them and that he was lying to me. He denied it, of course, but I didn't care. I kept pushing and accusing, trying to get under his skin. I could see the frustration in his eyes, but instead of feeling bad, I felt satisfied. I wanted him to feel guilty, even if he didn't deserve to. I wanted him to feel the weight of my accusations because it made me feel less guilty about the things I was doing behind his back. Even after all the fights and drama, I kept cheating on my husband. It was like I couldn't stop myself. Every chance I got, I would find a way to sneak off and meet up with one of my lovers. It was thrilling and made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years, but it also left me feeling empty and more bitter than before. And even though I was the one doing wrong, I kept accusing my husband of cheating with Beatrice. It had become such a regular part of our arguments that I didn't even need a real reason to bring it up anymore. It was like a game I played to keep the heat off myself. For a long time, my husband didn't fight back much. He just looked tired and drained, like he was giving up. But I didn't care. I thought as long as I was clever enough to keep my secrets, I could keep living the way I wanted. I thought I had everything under control. Then came our 10-year wedding anniversary. 10 years of marriage, and I was still lying, cheating, and playing the victim. But I wanted the anniversary to look perfect on the outside, like we were this happy, loving couple. So I planned a big party and invited all our friends and family. I wanted people to see us and think we were doing great, even though we weren't. And here's where I did something so reckless, even I couldn't believe it. I invited the man I was seeing at the time to the party. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I thought I was untouchable, that I could keep juggling my lies forever. Or maybe I just wanted the thrill of having him there, knowing no one else would know who he really was to me. At the party, everything started off fine. People were laughing and chatting, and my husband was trying to play the role of the perfect host. But then I started spending too much time with my lover. We were talking and laughing like we were the only two people in the room, and I could feel the way he was looking at me. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't notice how obvious we were being. But my husband did. I saw him watching us from across the room, his face unreadable. Then he walked over to us, and I knew something was wrong. His voice was low and sharp, and he asked me if I had no shame. The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked at him, and I could see the anger and hurt in his eyes. He wasn't the tired, defeated man I had been arguing with for months. He was furious, and he wasn't going to let this slide. I panicked. I didn't know what to do, so I did what I always did. I tried to turn it around on him. I pointed at Beatrice, who was standing nearby, and started accusing him again. I said he was no better than me because he had been sneaking around with his secretary, and that he had no right to judge me. Beatrice's face crumpled, and she started crying right there in front of everyone. She looked so small and broken, and for the first time I felt a pang of guilt. But it was too late to stop. I had to keep going to protect my secret. But then my husband did something I never expected. He pulled out his phone and showed everyone a video. It was a video of me sneaking into a car with my lover and kissing him. I froze. My heart sank into my stomach as the room went silent. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He said he had gotten the video a day ago and had been thinking about what to do with it. He wanted to call off our anniversary party, but he didn't want to give people the wrong idea. He was confused, but now he wasn't. Now he had made up his mind. He told everyone that he was done with me, and he didn't care who knew the truth anymore. The room erupted into whispers and stares. People were looking at me like I was the worst person they had ever seen. I could hear them saying things under their breath, calling me names and judging me. My face burned with shame, and I couldn't bring myself to look at anyone. I stood there, frozen, as the weight of everything came crashing down on me. All my lies, all my betrayals, all the hurt I had caused was all out in the open now. There was no escaping it, no more pretending. I had destroyed everything, and there was no one to blame but myself. I lowered my head, trying to disappear into the floor, but it didn't help. The whispers and stares felt like daggers, and I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. All I could do was stand there and feel the shame wash over me, knowing that I had finally been exposed for who I really was. And that was the moment I realized how far I had fallen. Update. It's been a month since my life fell apart, and I don't even know where to begin. Everything feels like a bad dream I can't wake up from, but it's real, and there's no escaping it. My husband kicked me out of the house the day after our anniversary party. He didn't yell or scream. He just told me to leave and said he didn't want to see me ever again. I didn't fight him because, honestly, what could I say? I had no defense left. I packed up what I could carry and walked out with my head hanging low. I didn't even know where to go at first. I couldn't face anyone, not after what happened. The video of me with my lover had spread like wildfire. Everyone at the party must have told someone, and soon it felt like the whole town knew about it. Everywhere I went, people would stop and stare or whisper behind my back. Even my parents don't want to speak to me. That's what hurts the most. They were always so proud of me, always showing me off to their friends, and now I'm their biggest disappointment. When I called them for help, my mother told me I had embarrassed the family and that they needed time to process everything. She said it wasn't the right time for me to come home, which was just her polite way of saying I wasn't welcome. The few friends I thought I had have all vanished too. No one answers my calls or messages anymore. It's like I've become invisible to everyone I used to know, and honestly, I don't blame them. Who would want to be associated with someone like me? But the worst part of all this is Beatrice. After everything I put her through, she decided to sue me for slander, and I lost. She had every right to do it, and I knew I didn't stand a chance in court. She brought evidence of all the times I had accused her of being with my husband, and there I was with nothing to defend myself because it was all lies. I sat there in that courtroom listening to the judge read out the decision, and I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I was ordered to pay her damages, which I can't even afford. I'm drowning in debt now because of it, and I don't know how I'll ever recover. It's hard to put into words how much I regret everything I've done. I destroyed my marriage, my reputation, and my relationships with everyone I care about. And for what? For a series of meaningless affairs and lies that gave me nothing but temporary thrills? Looking back, I can't even understand why I let things get so bad. Now I'm staying in a tiny, run-down apartment on the edge of town, living off the little money I have left. Every day feels empty and lonely. I spend most of my time staring at the walls, thinking about all the ways I ruined my life. The silence is the hardest part. Without my husband or anyone else around, it feels like the world has completely moved on without me. Sometimes I think about calling him, begging him to forgive me, but I know it's pointless. Even if he could find it in his heart to forgive me, which I doubt, there's no way he would ever take me back. I burned that bridge the moment I decided to invite my lover to our anniversary party. I wish I could go back and undo it all, but I can't. All I can do now is live with the consequences of my actions. And let me tell you, the consequences are unbearable. Every time I close my eyes, I see the look on my husband's face when he showed that video to everyone. I hear the whispers and feel the weight of the shame all over again. This is my life now, a mess of my own making. And the worst part is, I have no one to blame but myself. Update 2. 6 months have now passed since everything fell apart, and I'm still trying to figure out how to live this new life of mine. Nothing about it feels normal yet, and honestly, I don't know if it ever will. After my husband kicked me out, I didn't just lose my home or my marriage. I lost the comfortable life I had gotten so used to. For the first time in over a decade, I had to face the reality of standing on my own 2 feet. I hadn't worked a job since I got married. My husband always took care of everything, and I liked it that way. I never had to worry about money or bills or how we'd get by. But now that safety net is gone, and I had no choice but to find a job. At first, I thought it wouldn't be that hard. I have a degree, and I figured my past experience, even though it was from years ago, would count for something. I was wrong. It felt like every door I knocked on slammed in my face. I sent out resume after resume, but nothing came of it. Every time I got called for an interview, I walked in with high hopes, but the second people realized who I was, their smiles faded. They'd glance at me like they recognized me from somewhere, and then their tone would change. I guess gossip travels far, and my name is probably still on everyone's lips. I finally got lucky after what felt like 100 interviews. It's not the kind of job I ever thought I'd be doing, but it's better than nothing. I'm working at a small cafe now, taking orders and cleaning tables. It's not glamorous, and it doesn't pay much, but at least it's something. I show up every day and try to keep my head down, but it's hard when people keep staring at me. I see the looks they give me, the way they whisper when they think I can't hear. Some of them even giggle or smirk, like my life is just some kind of joke to them. It's humiliating, but I try not to let it show. I just focus on my work and remind myself that this is what I deserve. Meanwhile, the divorce is officially done. It's weird to think that I'm no longer his wife after 10 years. It's like a part of my identity has been stripped away, and I'm not sure who I am without it. When the papers came in, I thought I'd feel some sense of closure, but all I felt was this heavy emptiness. And here's the real kicker. My ex-husband is dating someone now, and it's not even Beatrice. All those accusations I threw at him, all the lies I told about their relationship, it was all for nothing. He's with my cousin. Can you believe that? My cousin of all people. It's funny in a twisted kind of way. I spent so much time accusing him of something that never existed, and in the end, he found someone completely different. My cousin is kind, smart, and everything I'm not. She's probably the kind of person he deserved all along, and I can't even be mad about it. I lied so much that I started believing my own lies, and look where it got me. Now, I'm just trying to figure out how to be a better person. I know I've done a lot of damage, and I can't take any of it back, but I want to at least try to fix myself. It's hard, though. Some days, I wake up and wonder if it's even possible to change. Other days, I feel a tiny glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I can rebuild my life from the ground up. That's where I am now, working a job I never imagined I'd have, living with the weight of my mistakes, and trying to pick up the pieces. It's not much of a life, but it's mine, and I'm doing the best I can with what's left.